So I wanted to get some cream cheese to spread on some toast one day. And my wife had been shopping. So I looked in the refrigerator and I saw she didn't get any cream cheese. And I thought, well, my goodness, why didn't you get the cream cheese, honey? And I was upset with her. I thought, well, she buys the kids their ice cream. Why doesn't she buy it? So my thinking starts to get crazy because I think she must love the kids more. She got the kids their ice cream. She got herself the thing, her peanut butter or whatever it is. Why didn't she get me the cream cheese? And I start to get upset. I start to get angry and I start to think crazy things like, I think I smelled some cologne on her the other day. Maybe she was with another man. And my thinking gets crazy. And then I stop and I think and I get my perspective and I realize, wait a minute. She does all the shopping. She does all the washing of clothes. She won't let me wash clothes. I've tried. I've said, can I let me do the laundry? She says, no, it'll all come out blue. Everything will come out wrong and you can't do the laundry. She takes care of me. She does all the clean. She does everything in the house. And I realized, you know what? My perspective on the cream cheese changed. Maybe I should go get my own cream cheese. Maybe I should go to the store and get the cream cheese. Maybe I should help her a little more with some other things. So it's a matter of perspective, I think, in a marriage, to be able to see how much you have. It's not about having what you want. It's about wanting what you have.
David Feldman, how are you? You are quite a prolific author. You've written 7 novels, which only 5 of them have been published on Amazon, if I'm not wrong.
No, I've written 8 books. They've all been published on Amazon. A 6-book mystery series, and several other books as well. A standalone novel called The Neighborhood, and my mystery series is called the Dora Ellison Mystery Series. They're all on Amazon, and they're all in Kindle Unlimited. So for people who belong to that, they can read all of them for free.
Oh yeah, I was referring to the series of books from the mystery series you've done. I've been quite interested in fiction lately because I'm a voracious reader of non-fiction, and fiction has never been part of my life in a major way. So I'm really interested in knowing the differences between fiction and non-fiction, or the novels you write and what non-fiction scientific style. What do you think is the difference there?
Well, for me, the fiction, I don't read a lot of nonfiction. So between the two of us, we cover the whole range of books, of literature. So for me, nonfiction that I've read has primarily been biographies of famous people. Just trying to think of what other nonfiction I read. For me, nonfiction really is the news, although I think the news also is fiction. Much in the news is fiction. But in terms of the heading of quote unquote nonfiction, I get my fill of nonfiction by watching news sites, 24-hour news sites, and reading the online newspapers. And I don't like what I read and what I hear. And the rest of the nonfiction I have is in my day-to-day life, which I do like very much. So for me, that's nonfiction. I'm curious to know what nonfiction you enjoy reading. Well, you read scientific books, yes?
I do, yes. Only books which are nonfiction. I've read some fiction books before, but less than 3% of the books I've read have something to do with fiction.
Well, I think so much of scientific writing is speculative. We have so much that spans philosophical writing, which to me, philosophical writing in a way is fiction, because it's supposing that we look at the universe this way or we look at the universe that way. And for me, that really, whether you call it fiction or not, I mean, we're labeling these things, and labeling it in and of itself is a kind of fiction, because you may label something one way and I may label something another way. In any case, it dovetails with my fiction, because what I write is I write stories about people. And I don't know why I write about these people. They tell me to write about them, so I write about them. They show up in my mind, and so I write about them. But this is a way that I process events that occur in my life and feelings that I have about different issues, social issues. I have a lot of opinions about social issues, and they show up in my books. And I also, to me, writing a mystery is a bit like making a puzzle. A mystery is a puzzle of sorts. We figure, someone is murdered or some kind of crime happens, and we have to figure out who did it. And I enjoy putting together the puzzle and making a maze of sorts so that the reader will have to, see this thing happens. Well, is that really the truth about who committed this crime or not? And they have to decide and think about it as they go along. And so I'm creating a puzzle, and hopefully I'm creating entertainment for the reader while pointing out issues, social issues, which my characters in my books live through. And also I have had many health challenges, some mental health challenges, some physical health challenges. I'm a recovered alcoholic and addict. I've been clean and sober many years. And so these things show up in my book too. So my entire universe shows up in my books as mysteries and as other books too. But a lot of it is mysteries.
Yeah, your desire to explore hidden plots or hidden narratives in the world is clearly shown on your first book from the Dora Ellison mystery series that you made called Not Today, yes, in which you narrate a secret plot of a multi-layered dark web of local corruption in which there's hidden intentions covered by some more evident intentions. And I'm really curious about the biological features driving the tremendous interest we all have as humans towards hidden intentions, conspiracies, or dark plots, as you mentioned.
Well, in the case of Not Today, so we have a person who, first of all, her name is Dora Ellison, and she's been traumatized. She grew up in a home where her father beat her mother. She was a little girl. I have a prequel, it's called Storm Warnings. Most of my books, except Not Today, have the word storm in the title. And the prequel is Storm Warnings, and it's free. If someone goes to my website, davidefeldman.com, they get that book for free. And they learn that Dora Ellison grew up around violence and trauma. She was a little girl, and she saw violence in her home. And so that's an issue. That's a hidden plot, the way you put it. Yes, it's a hidden plot. It's a hidden issue that affects her. And it has left her traumatized, but she deals with her trauma with anger and rage. Sometimes she will see bullies. I don't like bullies. So bullies are people who take advantage of people who are weaker than them and who push around and hurt people who are weaker than them. And we see that all, and I think that's part of society, and I think it's part of life. And maybe it's a natural, I don't know if it's a natural tendency, but one could say it's a natural tendency. It's part of the natural order of things that the stronger take advantage of the weaker. Until the weaker come together and maybe think of strategies to deal with that issue. But she encounters bullies. Someone will be beating his wife on the street, and she'll do something about it, and she'll teach the bully a lesson. Someone is beating their dog, and she beats up the guy, and she takes the dog, and she keeps the dog. So she sees bullies, and I think a lot of us see that in life. In Not Today, early in the book, she's at the supermarket, and there's a kid in front of her, a young man, maybe 15 years old, 16 years old, in front of her on the line. And it's a line where you have to have 10 items or less. And there's a man in front of this kid, a big, strong man, maybe 50 years old, white hair, but big, heavy, hefty man. And he has 15 items. And the kid says something to him about it. Says, you really should be over there on that line. And the guy kind of throws his face at it, puts his face in front of him and says, "What are you going to do about it?" And he starts pushing around the kid. Well, Dora does something about it herself, and she takes care of this guy. And the guy is very willing to move to the other line after she does something. And the kid is very grateful. So I think we see these are hidden events and circumstances that we see every day in life. They're part of life, and I put them in my books. So Dora is a person, that's what she's like. And eventually, and she's also gay, she's a lesbian, and her girlfriend is a police lieutenant. And the police lieutenant is getting phone calls about a murder, quote unquote, a murder that wasn't a murder. What does that mean? Well, the book starts with a young man and a young woman in bed together doing what a young man and a young woman, well, sometimes a young man and a young man, or a woman and a woman, but in this case, a young man, teenage boy and girl are in bed, and the parents aren't home, and things get heated, and the boy pushes the girl back on the bed, and she hits her head and she dies. That's what the phone call is about. And what we see is, and what the phone call says is that this murder that wasn't a murder led to years and years of widespread corruption. And that's really what you were referring to. And the plot of the book is about corruption. And there is tremendous amount of corruption. People are finding, it's almost like the town is abusing people. People are finding people who speak out against the town, or people who are rabble rousers, or are, resistant to following the natural order of the way the town wants to run things. They find their garbage all over the street, or they find their taxes went up, or they get parking tickets, or things happen that the town has control over. Maybe the sewer pipe is broken and there's sewage all over the place. And when they speak up about it, someone comes to visit them.
Did you know that there's a thread on Reddit called Justice Porn, in which it is a collection of videos of people who have been wronged by a presumably stronger person, and that presumably weaker person is more than able, as it's shown in the video, in this series of videos, to give back the violence and respond in a way which is satisfactory. And then a lot of the times, the person who initiated the violence, the presumably stronger guy, gets to the other person and makes a sign of respect, like saying that, hey, you have been able to hold your ground. This is something incredible. Well done. And inside of the bully community, there's some kind of respect to the person who stands up. And
so, in other words, the bullies change. Change happens. The bully is no longer a bully, or perhaps, at least in this situation, is no longer a bully. I think that's terrific. That's what happens in my books, although I write a mystery around these things. But yes, I think that's great. I don't like bullies. I think we see a lot of it. If you look at what goes on in the news, on some of these news, CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or whatever BBC or whatever you watch where you are in Spain, we see a lot of bullies. People who run countries very often appear to be bullies. I don't know what really goes on, because I only know what I see in the news, but they certainly do frequently appear to be bullies.
You talked about one side of the coin, which is that there's an inherent tendency to become bullies in our biology. We humans have some tendencies to becoming violent towards people who are weaker, and that's true. It's part of our nature. But it is also true that we have in our nature the tendency towards defending the little guy in more of a leftist kind of way, in which we see the person who's being wronged by a person who's deploying violence in an unfair way because he's more competent or more capable of doing so. And we position ourselves not in the side of the person who's got the upper hand in that situation, but with the little guy. Why? Because we have a sense of justice and morality, which is also part of the equation. And we have to take into account both of the sides in order to realize what the optimal way of acting at a societal level is. We have the tendency to become bullies if the environment is appropriate, like, for example, during Nazi Germany, no one, or a really small group of people, if any, talked truth to power, because it was simply individually not worthy. You were not going to change anything, and people knew that, so they didn't do anything. But now it is easier to speak truth to power and try to go against that inherent tendency to do violence towards the little guy.
That's right. And in my opinion, that comes from our very natural tendency toward compassion. I think, look, when we're children, very often there's bullying at school. It's just something that happens to many people at school. Either they're bullied or they witness bullying, or sometimes they are the bully. But I think that we see that happening first in the playground or on the street when children are very young in the street. They witness bullying or they're bullied, and they come to understand what it's like to be the victim. And so they grow up with some sense of compassion. And perhaps if they're lucky, they have parents who share with them and who teach them to have a sense of compassion, what it feels like to be a bully. And that gives them a greater sense of social justice and an understanding of these issues in a more abstract sense as they get older and they start to learn about things that are going on outside of their own home and outside of their own communities.
Interesting. You also have a book related to marriage, how to have a successful marriage. What would you say is the key, or if not the key, the main features or characteristics that would maximize the odds of having a happy, successful, and long-term marriage?
So, in my opinion, and this comes from my own experience, I've been married for, in May, it'll be 36 years. I've been with my wife in November, it'll be 38 years. And I've been with no one else. I've been 100% faithful to my wife. First of all, when speaking of fidelity, I learned very young about fidelity because when I was 16 or something like that, I cheated on a girl, and that hurt her. And I could see that it hurt her. And I came to understand that. And I regretted it. And then when I was in my 20s, someone cheated on me. And that was terribly, terribly painful. So I've grown up with a very strong sense of fidelity. Also, I've had a number of unsuccessful, unhappy relationships. I had a lot of girlfriends growing up. And once I was married and once I was engaged and with the woman who would become my wife, I learned to be very grateful. A big part of my happiness in life, and a big key to my happiness in life, is gratitude, is to count my blessings. And sometimes it might sound silly to say, count my blessings. You know, I have this going on, I have that going on. My wife is arguing about me. She wants to watch something else on TV. She likes different food. She likes Indian food. I like Spanish food. We can't agree. I don't like her mother. You know, these kinds of things come up. But I stop and think, I love my wife, and she loves me, and we really, really do care about each other. And I've been in so many unhappy relationships. You know, I have so much to be grateful for. I have a funny story. I call it the cream cheese story. So I wanted to get some cream cheese to spread on some toast one day, and my wife had been shopping, so I looked in the refrigerator and I saw she didn't get any cream cheese. And I thought, well, my goodness, why didn't you get the cream cheese, honey? And I was upset with her. You know, I thought, well, you know, she buys the kids their ice cream. Why doesn't she buy it? So my thinking starts to get crazy because I think she must love the kids more. She got the kids their ice cream. She got herself the thing, her peanut butter or whatever it is. Why didn't she get me the cream cheese? And I start to get upset. I start to get angry, and I start to think crazy things like, you know, I think I smelled some cologne on her the other day. Maybe she was with another man. And my thinking gets crazy. And then I stop and I think and I get my perspective and I realize, wait a minute. She does all the shopping. She does all the washing of clothes. She won't let me wash clothes. I've tried. I've said, can I let me do the laundry? She says, no, it'll all come out blue. You know, everything will come out wrong, and you can't do the laundry. She takes care of me. She does all the clean. She does everything in the house. And I realized, you know what? My perspective on the cream cheese changed. Maybe I should go get my own cream cheese. Maybe I should go to the store and get the cream cheese. Maybe I should help her a little more with some other things. So it's a matter of perspective, I think, in a marriage, to be able to see how much you have. You know, it's not about having what you want. It's about wanting what you have.
I've lately been thinking about a psychological feature which I think transcends my situation, but I've definitely haven't able to see it happen or emerge in my own psychology, which is that when you complain about your environment or you are not nice to the people around you and you're just complaining about how other people are not doing things in the way you would like them to do them because you think them to be inefficient or you would like them to be more efficient, let's say, that sends a signal to yourself of inappropriateness and insufficiency. Because who is the kind of person who is surrounded by insufficient and inefficient people if it is not an insufficient and inefficient person itself? So you diagnose in yourself a sense of insufficiency and inefficiency. If those are the two things that you are complaining about, which are, I think, the center, the bullseye of any problem you can have. And the opposite, I think, is also true, which would be the gratitude. Having gratitude towards the things that are good in your environment would produce in yourself a sense of sufficiency and self-respect, and all the good psychological features come from you when you are appreciative of the good features in your environment.
Yes, I absolutely agree. The lack and insufficiency, as you call it, is very much a state of mind. It might sound silly, but if I remind myself, and I do this, part of how I got, this is very much a pillar and a formative part of how I got clean and sober. I used to be a drug addict. So a big part of letting go of that addiction, which is 30 years ago, is to have gratitude. Spirituality in general and some more specific things. But a big part of it is for me to stop and say, wait a minute, I have enough to eat. I have a place to live. Not everybody does. I'm a piano player. My fingers work. I can play. I know how to play piano. I can read and write. We stop and think about these things. There are people, I know people who do not have these things and cannot do these things. I have electricity. I have running water. I have a toilet that works. If I start to think like this, I start to feel more grateful. And that's very helpful in my marriage. Also, another thing, originally you asked about marriage, is to have some idea of what I can control and what I cannot control. There's a lot that I cannot control. I cannot control other people. I can make a suggestion, but I also have to have the perspective of, well, this is what I want. It's not the way things should be. It's just a thing that I want. I want to watch this movie tonight with my wife. If she doesn't want to watch that movie, she gets to have her own opinion. She gets to make a choice. And maybe we should come together and say, well, and I'll give you a real example. I write mysteries and I love to watch mystery movies and read mystery books. She doesn't like that stuff. It's too painful for her. She likes to watch more cheerful things. So she likes romantic comedies. So we will find something together that we both like. Probably not a mystery, probably not a romantic comedy. I don't know what, maybe some nonfiction, something. I don't know. Something about the universe. She's a scientist, by the way, my wife. That's what she does for a living. And she has ideas about science and she has ideas about God. And believe it or not, she's a scientist who believes in God and sees science and nature and the stars and astronomy and all sciences as evidence of God, which I know you like to talk about the universe and things like that. And if you like, we can discuss that. But anyway, that's my answer, a very long answer to your short question.
Interesting. I know that you've gone through a incredibly big medical history. You've gone through drug addiction, spinal problems that were heading towards paralysis, 2 hip replacements, intestinal resection with
colostomy,
and then cancer, and you survived all that. That's incredible. What made you have faith or the willingness to keep pushing, even if the situation was as dire as it can get?
Well, while a lot of these things did happen at once, they didn't all happen at once. The drug addiction is something I went through for all of my youth, in my teens, from the early 70s to the early 90s. I was high the whole time. And I got clean and sober in the early 90s. Ever since, and I've had no drugs, alcohol, nothing like that since April 14th of 1994. So that was a long time ago. It was very difficult and it was a long process, but I did it by acquiring certain spiritual ideas. The other things, yes, did happen more recently, and they were very difficult. And what I did was I dealt with them a day at a time. I dealt with what's going on Tuesday, what's going on Wednesday. And, the most difficult is when I had this intestinal resection, which meant they would cut a piece out of my intestines. And they said, you might wake up with a colostomy, which is a bag attached to my stomach. So I'm going to the bathroom in a bag. And I lived with like that for 3 months. And that was very difficult. It was very upsetting. But what was my choice? I listened to a lot of YouTube videos and on prayers with a lot of prayers in them. I listened to certain music that is very spiritual in nature. I use an app that has many, many meditations in it. And I listen to these meditations, which have all kinds of very positive focus. And it helped me to fill my mind with positive things. Because if I don't fill my mind with positive things, and if I'm in pain and if I'm frightened, I'm aware that I'm in pain and I'm frightened. So I no longer hurt the people around me, which is what I used to do. But if I'm in pain and I'm frightened and I don't fill my mind with positive things, my mind will make up negative things. I'm very creative. I write mysteries which have a lot of bad things in them, and my mind will make up bad things, and I will have dreams about bad things and knives and surgeons and all kinds of things. So what I did was I filled my mind with positive things, and I filled my life with positive people to speak to. And it's also another reason why I love my wife, because she was by my side and she's always very positive. If I say, well, oh my God, my hip is, I can't walk anymore because my hip is going and I'm going to need surgery. They're going to have to take the whole thing out. Oh my God, that's just so horrible. She said, her view is, well, be thankful that they can do these surgeries, because 50 years ago, 100 years ago, not so long ago, you'd be in big trouble. You wouldn't be able to walk. You had cancer. Thank God. And I was upset. I was very upset. And I was very frightened that I had cancer, at least for a little while. And she said, yes, but you can go to the best hospitals in the world. I went to Sloan Kettering, which is in New York City. And they have great hospitals everywhere, but this is one of the best. And I went there and I saw some of the best doctors. I happened to be on Medicare, so I paid almost nothing for this stuff. So this is all things to be grateful for. And she always points this out. And sometimes I think, oh my God, she's so positive. I can't take it anymore. She's so positive. But the truth is, I'm very blessed that I have a wife who's so positive. And she's also very smart. She helped me find the best doctors and she helped me find the best treatment. And she reminded me, don't look on websites so much. Don't Google so much about your health issues, because you're going to find information that's not from really, good sources, not from really validated, sources that have real authority, gravitas behind them. You're going to find bad information that some knucklehead put on the internet. So together we're a very good team, and she's really helped me.
Interesting. It's incredible how going through a bad moment, like the worst example I've heard of, or that I know of, is Viktor Frankl during the Second World War. He was in a concentration camp. And
I know about him.
That sense of meaning and capacity to keep pushing, no matter of the situation, is admirable and something I would like to cultivate in myself. And you made a comment before about how paradoxical it seems to be the fact that a scientist like your wife believes in some superior power which has some influence over the universe. In philosophy, there's a problem called the contingency problem, which states that if everything exists due to a previous state, and cause and effect is the thing which rules over the universe, and we hold the Big Bang to be the initiator of every movement and existence of matter in the universe, we cannot presuppose anything before that. We do not know what created the Big Bang. And this problem is the principal one, or the only one required in order to cultivate or insert the seed of belief in me. The fact that I cannot reason about what was there that created the universe before the universe existed 13.8 billion years ago just allows me to realize how robustly ignorant we are as a species. We do not know what created nature, what created the universe. And at least we know that we do not know. That's something which is incredibly robust. And saying that God does not exist, well, maybe that's true, but you cannot know that with 100% of certainty. But it's also true that you could always change nature for God in any statement about belief or a superior entity. Let's say you have a relationship to God. I could say that in relation to nature, the physical constants of the universe are determined by nature, and that the universe itself is the thing that we presuppose to be existing forever. And if you are going to be granted the possibility of, in a coherent manner, to assume the existence of something in the universe, or well, not in the universe, but apart from the universe, just existing for forever, for eternity, and in all the places, why not do that with the physical constants themselves? So I don't know what your thoughts are there, and if you believe that God and nature are interchangeable.
So for me, a lot of what you're talking about is spelling. If you say, well, there's nature and there's God, to me, it's all spelling. So to me, it's all one thing. I don't know. So first of all, I completely agree with your idea that we are tremendously ignorant. We know so little. And in terms of talking about the Big Bang and what came before the Big Bang, one thing we're very ignorant about is time. What is before the Big Bang? Maybe there's no before. Maybe there's no after. Maybe the Big Bang didn't happen. Maybe everything happens in some way that's different than the way we conceive of time. Maybe there's no before and there's no after. Maybe we only have very limited capacity to understand sequences of things. You see, so I don't know what the answer to this is. The other thing for me at the root of this is that science, as much as we understand biology, and by we I mean humans, have dissected brains and have tested synapses, and we're making a lot of strides in figuring out, well, this little piece of the brain controls the movement of this finger. So if my finger is paralyzed, and we can do something here right in this spot in the brain to make my finger work again. They've gotten very far. They've come quite a long way. But what they haven't come a long way in, and I think we know nothing about, and I've done some research on this, although I haven't done it that recently, but I don't think it's changed. We do not understand what consciousness is. We understand that we have these cells in the brain. We have electrical impulses. We have synapses that fire, and electrical currents move around, and maybe this has something to do with consciousness, but we do not really understand what physicality there is behind me saying, I am me, and having an awareness of myself and my environment and what is going on in your body physically that creates this awareness that you have about Alex. So the next step for me in the thought about what you're asking and speaking about is to say, well, we don't understand consciousness even on a small level. Even in a rat, we don't understand. What does the rat know? What is the rat aware of? Does the rat have a high intelligence on the level of a rat in some way we don't understand? Who knows? So is it not possible, since we have so little understanding about consciousness, that there is much greater consciousness that we understand? Not the way maybe religion talks about it, because religion has to talk about things in a way that even a teenage child, a child can understand. In order to participate in the religion, it has to be put out there in such a way that a child can understand. But if you look at some of the thinkers in all of the world's religions, there is some complex thought going on there. It's not necessarily what they teach to a 14-year-old Hindu or Jew or Christian or whatever, or Muslim. But there is great thought at the level of the great writers of religions. And I believe that it's very possible that there is consciousness that is not just in the micro level of my brain and your brain, but between things, between individuals, between not just individuals, but greater consciousness in things, in the universe, in ways we don't understand, and we don't even understand how to talk about them, much less measure them scientifically. So this is why I think also the other thing is my experience is that my wife, who is a scientist, who believes in God, she went to an Ivy League school, and my children are also very smart. I am by far the dumbest person in my family. My wife believes in God, and she's so much smarter than me that I can stop right there and say, well, there has to be a God, because my wife is always right. So that's sort of a joke, but it's also sort of true. But what my first points about this is kind of a step-by-step view of why I don't necessarily believe that some specific thing is the way things are, but I believe that there is much greater consciousness than we're aware of, and that myself, Dave, is nowhere near smart enough to understand this or quantify it, just to believe. But I do believe that there is much more to consciousness and awareness, and what one could call God, and I think can be spread in positive ways than we're aware. In fact, and a quick example, and then I'll stop talking for a second, is prayer. I have seen prayer. I mean, there have been scientific studies that prayer works. Does it always work the way we expect? Probably not. I don't know really that much about the scientific studies, but I think that positivity, when it's put out there in a strong way and with great intention, especially by groups of people, can lead to change and can lead to, look, you and I talked about this when we chatted a while back. Inventions have sprung up in different parts of the world at the same time because they were in the air somehow, in some way we don't understand. Things have come into being, maybe built on prior inventions, but sometimes not. Sometimes great leaps in thought and technology have seemed to occur out of nowhere. I'm sure there's much more behind that, but I don't know what it is.
What feels enchanting in my case about consciousness is that I cannot even conceive of a hypothetical response to what consciousness is that would feel satisfactory. There's nothing that you could put there as a response to that question of what is consciousness, which would feel satisfactory. There's nothing that I can conceive of that would satisfy that thirst for knowledge that is easily satisfied with other fields of knowledge. Like, for example, how many species of birds do exist? There's surely a number, or at least a range, and I can, in principle, conceive of a response. But in terms of consciousness, what accounts for the feeling of sweetness, how is that encoded at the level of neural firing? It's just mind-blowing. There's not an analog version which I can think of, an analogy which I can think of which would be satisfactory. When is it that I can replicate that thing? For example, with the liver, with the filtrating of the blood, I can more or less conceive of that because there's a limited complexity going on there. There's a lot of processes there, and I'm not aware of even half of them. But I conceive of some notions of scientific research which could satisfy my needs, for my thirst for knowledge of how the liver works and how it operates and the functions emerging out of the interaction of cells. But in terms of the function of the brain and the generation of an awareness of something that feels like being a human, that is just mind-blowing.
So I have something to say about this. In my opinion, the examples you're giving are intellectual abstract examples. And I think that having an intellectual abstract understanding of consciousness is not possible, because consciousness is not an intellectual abstract occurrence. It's a phenomenon that can be responded to by direct experience. It's I think one of the most wonderful ideas came from the Buddha, that who talked about many, many things that were abstract ideas, but none of them were as valuable as direct experience. And I think there's a great the recently deceased Vietnamese, well, he lived in France, monk Thich Nhat Hanh has a wonderful story. I don't know if it's a Zen koan or not, but of standing in front of a big group of people and holding up a flower and saying, "What is this? Tell me what this is. Give me." And I don't remember how he asked the question, which I think would be an important thing to do. But he said, how can you sum up this? And he holds up a flower and he looks, and there's all monks, very learned, smart Buddhist monks. And nobody says anything. And then one guy smiles and he points to him and he says, "Yes, that's the answer." And because he was having an emotional, visceral, and I think the answer is visceral response that is cognitive and is experiential and was also abstract, I suppose. I don't know, but that's his response. And it was a conscious response to the flower. It's his consciousness responded to that flower with love and with a smile by having his physicality expressed his consciousness in a way that was beyond words. It was a smile. So to me, that's just a most wonderful thing.
That relates to the continuity of consciousness. Consciousness, by definition, is continuous. It cannot perceive its own non-existence. So when you start sleeping or when you are anesthetized, you stop being aware of you not being aware. At the moment you stop being aware. And I think I have the intuition that what you were talking about with the flower and that experience, that being so inherently evident, being the response to what accounts for the flower, makes me feel of the fact that it is not something, awareness is not something that we could do a meta-analysis of. It's not something that we could do extrapolation and understand its nature, as we can do with every other phenomenon in the universe. But with consciousness, with awareness, with the thing that exists while perceiving all the other phenomena, that thing, from what you've said, this is what I've understood from it, you cannot account for it in a satisfactory way. You can explain a phenomenon if it is not consciousness, but once you start describing consciousness, you get to some kind of barrier, which is unsurmountable. Maybe you were referring to that makes you unable to explain what would be required to articulate consciousness out of nothingness.
Yeah, I don't find that to be a barrier at all. I find that there is an inherent inability of words to abstract consciousness. And in fact, I think when you talk about that, you get to the answer of what happened before the Big Bang. Consciousness is what happened before the Big Bang. There wasn't any matter, there was consciousness. We don't understand consciousness. We really don't understand consciousness. We could talk about it and we can discuss the attributes of consciousness. And we could say, well, consciousness seems to be this and seems to be that. And I can scientifically explain, the attributes and the results and the what happens because of consciousness and what leads to it and what we think about it. And, you mentioned when we're anesthetized. I've had a lot of surgery in the last few years, and I've been anesthetized 6, 7, 8 times. And it's true. I don't remember what happened when I was anesthetized. I was there. I was speaking to the anesthesiologist, and then it was 5 hours later, and I was waking up somewhere. But I suspect something was going on. I can't say anything about that because I don't know. But I suspect that consciousness is forever. It doesn't start, it doesn't end, it's always around. And it only started to be existing in matter in our brains with the Big Bang, which, by the way, if you look at, I'm Jewish, and I spent some time, I'm also an interfaith minister, and I studied at a seminary in New York City with the founder of the interfaith movement. His name was Rabbi Joseph Gelberman. He was 99 when he taught our class, 99 years old. And he used to talk about the Big Bang, and he talked about Kabbalah, and the Big Bang is the formation of the universe in the Kabbalah story. In the way the Kabbalah talks about the universe forming, it is the Big Bang. Okay, which I can explain if you like, but I don't know if it's necessary for this conversation. But I do believe that consciousness, which is not measurable in a real way, because consciousness is experience. One has to experience consciousness. I think that existed always, but I could be wrong, because I know nothing about consciousness except that I'm here now experiencing this. That's what I can say. But that's very Buddhist, experience. What is this? This is this.
Do you see panpsychism as a plausible explanation? Not explanation, but as a plausible theory which accounts for consciousness?
Please explain what you mean. I don't know what you mean.
Panpsychism is a theory which states that everything in the universe, every particle, every quark, every piece of matter or of existence in the universe has in itself the capacity or the inbuilt capacity to be conscious. Everything is conscious in the same way that a thermostat responds to a fluctuation in temperature. A rock responds to you hitting it, or it's subject to the gravitational field generated by the Earth or all the other matter around it, in the same way that you respond to your environment in another certain way. There's more layers of freedom that you've evolved through the complexity of the ways in which you can interact and the plasticity of your brain, which leads to the capacity to learn and from it adapt to your environment. But panpsychism says that there's nothing fundamental that differentiates you and a rock. The differences there are just of quantity, not of quality.
I think there's truth in that, but once we start making generalizations about what a rock's experience is, then I think we get into trouble, because I'm not a rock. But I do agree that everything is connected. I know of that. I think of that as a Buddhist idea, that dependent arising. Everything is connected and everything is part of everything else. And the example I like to give, I'm a writer, is that my book is the writer who wrote the book. It is the ideas that went into the book. It's the paper that came from the tree. It's the tree. It's the person who cut down the tree. It's the rain that went into feeding the tree. It's what happens to the book later. It's, when the book is burned and turns into ashes eventually. All of that is the book. Everything is part of everything. And I do agree with that. But I also agree that there is just so much we cannot know. And once we start talking about it, we're turning everything into abstract ideas. And then as soon as we do that, we're stepping away from reality. But we have no choice. This is how we are. We're beings that think, and in a way, I think that we are less than the animals, because the animals experience. All they do, and I could be wrong about this. I don't know if all they do is experience, but it seems to me that I'm sitting here with my dog in my lap, and my dog is experiencing sitting in my lap, and I'm petting my dog. And he's not sitting here worrying about the universe and is a rock conscious or not. He's just sitting here with his owner petting it, and he's having a great time. So it gets too tricky when we start to have conjecture about ideas and rocks and consciousness and things. But I do agree that everything is connected, and I do agree that consciousness is everywhere.
Yeah, the distinction between truth and falsehood is not so clear cut. For example, the distinction, right. What we have the stereotype that nonfiction is truth, or points towards, at least tries out the scientific method. And so, it's more prone to showing you the truth than a fictional writing. But at a different level of analysis, fictional writing is still true. It's a metaphor for something which you have deeply ingrained in your biology to respond in a certain way. Why is it that I care about the lesbian girl who gets the feeling in the queue of the supermarket of wanting to do justice and defend the little guy in front of her? I do care about that. And maybe it is not literally true in the sense that that occurrence didn't actually happen, which maybe it did, in not that you have perceived of it, but maybe it did. But it is true at the level of the occurrence is capturing the essence of what matters. The fact that that guy was being bullied by the other guy in itself is not relevant. What is relevant is the sociological phenomena occurring there, which has been perfectly captured in your book. So at different levels of analysis, fictional writings are still as true, I would argue.
Well, I would agree with that. I would also add another level to it, and that is, I was talking about that a book is this, a book is that, a book is everything. It's these different things. A book is also the experience that the reader has with the book. In my book, there are many different characters who have all sorts of different ideas and different experiences, and hopefully I'm writing about these different people and their experiences and the things they're upset about. They all have character arcs. They all have challenges, and they overcome these challenges, or sometimes they don't overcome the challenges and they fall victim to them. And hopefully the reader will go on a journey with each of these characters and have an experience with the book. And that experience of cognition, of emotional, mental, and experiential interaction with a piece of literature will be something that is of value to the individual who's reading the book, and will give them some enjoyment, and also give them, as you're saying, perspective on certain ideas about social justice.
Yeah,
it operates on many levels. It's entertainment. It's ideas I'm trying to communicate. It's compassion we learn to have for other people, because that's a lot of what I write about, is people who are having a hard time, who are sick, who have the illnesses I have, who have depression, who are frightened. She fights with criminals, but after the fight, she's devastated. It's very painful and difficult for her to come back after a fight. So, these things operate on different levels of consciousness and awareness.
I would like to hear your thoughts about something I've relatively recently concluded, which is that treating others kindly is the only proper way of acting always. There's not a single case in which treating other people in an unkindly manner is appropriate. It feels good doing it. You despise someone and you say, "Hey, I hate you," or "Hey, you are an asshole," or you know what I mean. Treating others in an unkindly manner is quite instinctual and feels good in the moment because you feel like you are righteous in doing so. But the fact that something feels good doesn't mean that it points towards truth, in the way that a donut feels good but is not true, in the sense of donut is bad for you, for your health and for your economics and for everything. Donut is bad, but it feels good. There's a difference there. And the same thing occurs with treating others badly. You should always be kind to the people around you, no matter how apparently stupid a comment they just did. That stupidity in them, even if it was true that they were stupid, which is something questionable, because maybe you are the person being stupid by considering them stupid, but assuming you are right, saying that there's someone in your environment which is less capable than you intellectually, that would not justify treating them badly, because that person is incredibly analogous to you. There was a moment in which you were 5 and you didn't know all the things you know, and you weren't as eloquent as you are currently. So why not treat that person in the same way that you were treated when you were 5 and much less capable in general?
Well, so this gets a little complicated. In general, and at a very basic level, compassion is very important. I think compassion and acting in kind ways is the most important thing. I agree completely, and it's at the root of everything I write. I have social justice issues in many of my books. However, here's where it gets tricky. First of all, and this comes up in recovery from drug addiction and alcoholism a lot. I don't talk very much about the programs because we're really not supposed to. But in the programs where people are taught how to stop drinking and taking drugs, they say there's one requirement for membership in those programs. You have to want to stop. So if you have a person who's suffering with drug addiction, let's say, but they don't want to, and it's a bad thing. There's no question about it. They're stealing, they're hurting their family, they're hurting themselves, they're shooting heroin, but they don't want to stop. What do you do? What does compassion do? And another example is if someone is homeless and has mental illness, having compassion for them and being helpful might not feel good because that person might lash out and be violent and reject your help and hurt you. How do you help that person? Now, maybe you call someone, a group, a government organization or a social group to come and help them, possibly. It's also possible that a person who I have compassion for and I might want to help, I have to protect myself. They might hurt me. They might take advantage of me. In fact, I might be a little codependent and maybe I'm trying to help them at my expense somehow. Maybe they say they want money. I see a homeless person on the street. Give me $10. I need $10 to eat a meal. Well, that's $10 I'm giving up of my money. Can I afford that? And are they going to take that $10 and are they going to eat a meal or are they going to go buy more drugs and hurt themselves? It can get very complicated. But in a general sense, I do think compassion and kindness are absolutely the most important qualities. It just gets tricky in terms of how to apply those things in real life.
The intersection between compassion and effective altruism is incredibly murky because the non-compassionate person, we would both agree, would ignore the homeless person and just maybe say fuck you to him and move on and brag off about how prosperous his life is in comparison to that homeless person. That would be what a non-compassionate person would do. But then a person we would consider to be compassionate could do either of two things. One of them could be to go to that person and try to help him in the best possible way he can conceive of, or knowing that his energy devoted to that person is not the thing that maximizes human well-being at a global scale, because buying bed nets for Somalia is what gives the best return on the investment. Being compassionate in that situation would require you to ignore the homeless person in front of you and do a donation of all your savings to buy bed nets for small children in Somalia.
I agree. So human beings do an awful lot of thinking. We do a lot of thinking and we have all sorts of ideas. People have all kinds of ideas about all kinds of things. And I think that if you were to just randomly pull 100 people off the street from all over the world, they would have different ideas of what it means to be compassionate. Some of them would agree that some people in Somalia deserved some kind of help, but other people would see the whole thing differently. People have different ideas about immigration. People have different ideas about social programs, excuse me, and about government helping people and about all kinds of things. And yet, all of those people, I'd be willing to bet if you surveyed them, every one of those people thinks that they're kind and compassionate, and they think that they're good people. Everyone thinks they're good. It's hard to come up with an answer. What do you do? This is why I don't want to run a government. Very hard. It's very hard. Yes, I want to help people, but people have all sorts of different ideas. And of course, not to get too into talking about running a government, but people pay people running for office to they donate to their campaigns and they expect something in return, even though legally perhaps they're not due anything in return. So life and society is very complex. and the notion of being kind and compassionate. Even in religions, the Christianity talks about kindness, the Jesus kindness. What does it mean? There are people with different ideas, and people in different religions and different, not in religions, people who are just very ethical. The Ethical Humanist Society, my parents were both presidents of the New York Ethical Humanist Society on Long Island. They had ideas about being kind and compassionate. And by the way they dealt with challenges and being upset in life and helping their own consciousness to be happy, a big part of that was experiential and was with music. I just want to add, this is a little off, back to our old topic, but one way to feel better when you're not feeling good can be music. And that was, my father didn't believe in God, but he believed in Mozart. And that's what helped him when he was upset. He would listen to Mozart and he would go back to loving my mother.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on this phrase. No evil person either builds themselves or believes themselves to be evil.
Yes, I agree, absolutely agree. Hitler thought he was a good person. He thought he was doing good. Listen, mentally ill people who are violent think they're good people. I mean, to the degree, some of them probably can't think at all. Their minds are too disturbed to think, and they're sick, and I feel compassion for sick people. But I think that the most evil people in history, Hitler, Stalin, some of the Roman emperors, whoever, I think they all thought they were good people doing good work. Yes.
And neither did they build themselves. They did not believe themselves to be evil, but not only that, there was a moment in which they were 5 and they were going to become evil, but they were not at that point. And the things that made them become evil were not subject to their choosing.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think so if there's a saying, at least here in America, hurt people hurt people. In other words, if you punch me in the face, I might not make a conscious decision to punch you in the face, but I might do it as a reaction to my own pain. And I think that has a lot to do with where World War II came from. If you look at the history of it, not to get too into it, but the Treaty of Versailles and the pain that most Germans felt, which Hitler took advantage of following World War I, and the decimation of Germany's economy following World War I. Hitler was able to take advantage of those conditions and scapegoat Jews, which a lot of people already had ideas about Jews being internationally connected and not having national pride and a sense of country because they were devoted to one another internationally as Jews. Like the Rothschilds, for instance, were used as examples. I don't know if they were used by Hitler, but that's an example of thinking. But it grew out of pain. It grew out of pain, and it took advantage of people's pain. And you talked at the beginning about people not being willing to speak up about Hitler. I think you referenced that. And there's a book that I wrote that it's not really on my list of books because it was published by a university press, and they marketed it themselves. But it's a book called Pilgrimage from Darkness, which is about it's nonfiction. It's a memoir. It's a true story of a man who grew up in Germany in the 1930s. He was a boy. It's very much what we're talking about. He was a boy, and there were parades in his town. He wanted to be in the parade. He was a boy, and all the cool boys, all the boys he admired, who were the tough boys who were great at sports, the boys he admired, they were all in the parades. Well, who were those boys? Hitler Youth. Hitler Youth. So he joined the Hitler Youth because he wanted to fit in with the other boys. And eventually he joined the Luftwaffe. And his parents didn't like the Nazis. They thought Hitler was terrible, and they were terrified of the Nazis, but they didn't say anything. And I grew up with the notion, I'm Jewish and my parents are Jewish. And among Jewish people in the United States, people would often question, why didn't normal, regular people do something about Hitler? Well, a few of them did. They tried to speak up, and they disappeared. So if your neighbor speaks up about Hitler in the 1930s, before the war started, when he was just coming to power, if your neighbor speaks up and then your neighbor's gone. Your neighbor just disappeared. Some other neighbors, they disappeared too. Well, they kept their mouth shut. In fact, the Nazis encouraged and taught children to turn their parents in. So it was a time where consciousness was very sick. There was a sickness in the air. There was a sickness in the national viewpoints and the ideas that were circulating around Germany at that time. And not to get too into that, but anyway, that guy who I wrote about, his name was Oscar Eder when he was in Germany. After the war, he knew his country did terrible things. He was terribly ashamed, and he went on a spiritual search, and he tried out all the world's religions. He became a Hindu, and he went to an ashram. He became a Muslim for a little while, a Christian. He was already a Christian, but he tried different kinds of Christianity, and eventually he lived and settled in Israel, and he married a Holocaust survivor, and he lived on a kibbutz for the rest of his life. He was converted by a famous rabbi in Jerusalem. And I wrote his story.
Whose bread I eat, his song I sing. This is exactly the example that you are referring to. And the difference between that occurrence and our situation is not a black or white distinction. It's a gray. Neither that was the darkest of the dark, and neither our situation is the clearer of the clear. We are both in a gray. And there's a lot of things about which I would not be vocal because it would generate too much pain in my personal life. And the same thing can be said about everyone. And we know that. And there's an elephant, a huge elephant in our public discourse. Well, not one, there's a lot of them. And the fact that that exists proves that the difference between Nazi Germany and our civilization, the West currently, is not a black or white distinction by no means.
That's right. I completely agree. And in America, in the last 8-9 years, there has been a little. People use the example of Nazi Germany, and other people say, "Well, it doesn't apply. That's not a good example." But it's neither one. It's neither black nor white. I think there are. Very early on in Nazi Germany, before the paranoia became so crazy and pervasive, it was a little bit like some things in America in the last few years. There have been some very challenging, yesterday I gave a book talk at a library for a group of about 20 women about my mysteries. And they asked me, and we talked about racism because my book, The Neighborhood, is about racism in a community. It's about four families. 3 of them are white. I'm sorry. In an all-white community in the 1970s where I grew up, and a black family moves in, and what happens? It's very explosive, and things happen. So they asked me, "Do you think things are better in terms of racism now than they were in the 1970s?" And they all had different opinions. Mostly, and I agree, yes, things are better. There are very few people are being lynched, being hung in trees because of their color. But there is also quite a lot of racism, and there are very extreme political divisions in American society right now, where there was the Black Lives Matter movement several years ago that was very strong, following the deaths of some black people at the hands of the police. The very strong Black Lives movement, and very strong, I guess you could say, it's leftist movement, which to be honest, I support. And there was an extreme reaction to that by the right, saying, "Well, this is terrible. This is racist." Talking about police and how bad police are. And quite frankly, I have friends who are police. I work with my city manager here. I'm on the Arts Council in my town, and the city manager is also the police chief. And he's a friend of mine. I used to be a competitive weightlifter in the 1980s, and I worked out with him, and he's a good guy. And I see both sides. I mean, I don't think all police are bad, but the ones who are bad, they make a bad name for the rest of them. So we have extreme divisions in society. No, it's not Nazi Germany. We're not killing people in ovens and camps, but we do have strong divisions, and we have people who don't listen to each other. And that's hard. That makes it hard to come to agreement.
The complexity of the truth is inconvenient for all sides.
Yes, that guy, very well said. I agree with that.
So I think that not acknowledging the improvement that has occurred in the last few decades towards everything, really, racism, feminism, all the things that we care about socially, not acknowledging the huge improvement that has occurred in all those things is one of the major things that faults the left currently, especially the left-wing people.
Well, I think it's a fault that humanity has.
Exactly.
If I think, and it depends on the person and their awareness and the way they think. So I know people, doesn't matter who, but I'm thinking of specific people. If I say, I see that your cancer is better, their reaction will not be, oh my goodness, it's wonderful. Yes, my cancer is better. Their reaction will be, yeah, but my leg hurts. So it's very easy to see, to shine a light on a negative and see that negative as the whole picture, instead of seeing the whole picture and saying, yes, we have this over here, which is negative, but we've made such great strides. And I think some of it is, listen, I did not grow up where my grandmother was a slave, okay, and my grandfather was lynched, and my family was spit on at school. Well, I had some of that because I was Jewish growing up. I was treated badly when I was 5 and 6 years old. But I think I did not grow up Black and with the history that Black people have. But I do have a lot of compassion for that. And I do understand some Black people saying, yeah, I guess we made some strides, but look at all of these terrible things that are going on, because that pain is it's very prevalent in some people's consciousness, and I have compassion for that too. So, look, all we can do is the best we can do every day, and say, okay, it's Thursday. I'm going to do the best I can on Thursday, and Friday we'll have to see about Friday.
A healthy man wants 1,000 things. A sick one wants only one.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I believe that morality isn't satisfactory by its nature. There's no point in the progress of human civilization that we could put a flag and say, okay, once we get to 1 death per 1 billion kilometers driven in our highways, we will be satisfied. No, that's not true at all. Once we get to that point, which is incredibly far from now, we will be unsatisfied because there's some other mile that we can add to the equation, so make deaths less common. There's not a single point of progress that will satisfy us, and the next one is not the one that will give us that. Maybe the way of achieving happiness and fulfillment is not through the achievement of further flags in our landscape, but the opposite, realizing that we are by ourselves already sufficient. We do not need anything else to be happy. Let's realize that, be sufficiently self-contained in ourselves, and then, as you said, act in the best possible way. There was an anecdote of a guy who got in a boat, and I read this in a book called The Scout Mindset by Julia Galef. It was basically a guy who was in the middle of the ocean, and he didn't know what to do with his life in order to survive. But he only knew that he had a limited amount of resources in his disposition, and every single thing he had was a trade-off for something else. So he calculated, how much water can I afford consuming? How much, and he had he could shoot a gun to the air, not a gun, sorry, the thing that you use in a flare, yeah. He had 3 of those, and he had to use them, but there was a trade-off between using them with a boat that was too far so that he couldn't see you, but you would increase the odds of them seeing you, or a boat, or wait for a boat which was closer. And the conclusion of this, the metaphor of this story, is that in an incredibly rational way of acting, that guy realized that the only thing he could do was acting in the best possible manner he could. And he saw every single thing he had in that moment, from his physical capacity to the water he was able to garner, and the capacity he had to call the attention of possible boats passing through near him with the flares. And he acted in a way which was incredibly rational. And I think that approach should be copied by our institutions. We do not know that what will work out to be the best possible thing, but we only know that we can only do as best as we can.
Yes, I agree with that. What you described was, in my opinion, a very good description of mindfulness, of having an awareness of everything that's going on in my environment, including myself and the challenges that I face and the solutions that I have at hand, and having an awareness of all of that because I'm experiencing life in a very aware way, and I'm present and I'm mindful, and that will lead to my taking the right action going forward. You know, I've heard some of my friends talk about rather than having a philosophy, just do the next right thing, which sounds very simple, and I think can be very difficult if you're not in a good mental state. The next right thing could be to set my neighbor's house on fire, depending on where my mind is at. But I think when we're coming from a very mindful state and an awareness, a state of awareness and a state of having compassion as our primary motivation and to do the least harm to the most people, I think that we can make the right choices and the choices that are best for everyone.
David, this has been one of the most enlightening conversations I've had in my show, and I really hope you have a lot of success selling your books and being able to spread the word of what your works ultimately are. And I would like to ask you, where can people find more about your works? I know you have an Amazon webpage. I will surely link that in the show notes.
Wonderful. Yes, my website is davidefeldman.com. And you'll see two doorways there. One doorway is to my music, and the other doorway is to all my books. And my books are there, and links to my books are there. Also, all of my books are on Amazon, and they're all in Kindle Unlimited. So people who belong to that program can read them for free, or for the $10 a month that they pay for that program. They can read all of my books, and I hope they'll give them a chance. And I just want to say that, you know, every time I've spoken to you, I've had a great time, and I've enjoyed the depth of our conversations, the knowledge that you helped to enlighten me with, and I've had a lot of fun.
Thank you very much, David. I will leave a link to your books in the show notes and your webpage.
Thanks so much, Alex. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.